Gauranitai Prahlad Nrsimha Temple at Malmi, Helsinki.
Yeah, just announce about the translation.
Oh, sure. There will be a translation in dark and depressing day. So in keeping with the mood of the day, we have got a verse which talks about how one should practice living in this world and how one should leave this world. So this is the 6th verse of the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajyatyante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kaunteya sada tat bhava bhavita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The process of changing one's nature at the critical moment of death is here explained. A person who at the end of his life quits his body thinking of Krishna attains the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. But it is not true that a person who thinks of something other than Krishna attains the same transcendental state. This is a point we should note very carefully. How can one die in proper state of mind? Maharaj Bharat, although a great personality, thought of a deer at the end of his life, and so in his next life he was transferred into the body of a deer. Although as a deer he remembered his past activities, he had to accept that animal body. Of course, one's thoughts during the course of one's life accumulate to influence one's thoughts at the moment of death, so this life creates one's next life. If in one's present life one lives in a mode of goodness and always thinks of Krishna, it is possible for one to remember Krishna at the end of one's life. That will help one be transferred to the transcendental nature of Krishna. If one is transcendentally absorbed in Krishna's service, then his next body will be transcendental, spiritual, not material. Therefore, the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare is the best process for successfully changing one's state of being at the end of one's life. It's a very interesting verse actually. And if you see, Srila Prabhupada's teachings actually lie in the way he translates the verses, but more than that, his actual teachings lie in the purports that he has written. There are many versions of Bhagavad Gita and at least 4 authorized versions in the Vaishnava Sampradayas itself. And yet, if we see that the version that was given by Srila Prabhupada is the most popular in the world, even though there are other authorized versions. What Srila Prabhupada wrote was exactly suiting the circumstances of our times. Most of the other versions of Gita that have come in other sampradayas, other Vaishnava sampradayas, have been directed mainly at the souls who were very pious in nature. Their descriptions of verses, if you see, they are available now. You realize that they are very philosophical in nature, but they are somehow in a language that is understandable by those who already have some level of sanskar in their lives. But if you see Srila Prabhupada's purports, they are directed at all kinds of people. Anybody who can read a language basically, he will realize that there is one version of Srila Prabhupada's book for him. It doesn't matter whether you had all the sanskaras or you had no sanskaras at all. If you read Srila Prabhupada's books and especially the purports that he gives to these verses, you'll realize that Srila Prabhupada has practically given all the essentials of spiritual life, which, if you practice, you can attain the Supreme Lord directly. And that's why it's always an honor and a great, you can say, a great, privilege to be able to read Srila Prabhupada's purports. It's not that, it's not, even though it's easily available, it's not cheap at all. So for example, here in this purport, Srila Prabhupada says, but it is not true that a person who thinks of something other than Krishna attains the same transcendental state. This is a point we should note very carefully. Now, anybody who is a scholar in the Vedic scriptures would be probably a little confused by this statement. Why is Prabhupada saying such a thing here? Though in the previous verses, in this verse itself he says, Yam yam bhati smaran bhavam tyajyat tante kalavedam, whatever state of being one remembers. So, at the time when Srila Prabhupada came to the West and started preaching his message, most of the things that he had, most of the West was overrun with these swamis from India. They had given their philosophies. It's not that Srila Prabhupada was the first one. Indian philosophy was well known over most of the Western Hemisphere. That was the 60s was the age of cultural revolution. And people were already aware of these Oriental philosophies, the mythologies so-called, that had come. So, amongst these schools of thought which had spread, one that came from Bengal had become most prominent all over India. Yatamat tatapat. As many opinions as you have, there are paths. Whatever you do, it's all right. Whatever philosophy you follow, you attain the same destination. And this was one particular philosophy which kind of became the main target of our Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the modern age. Right, beginning from Bhakti Vinod Thakur, going to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and coming down to Srila Prabhupada. This kind of Mayavad, this kind of impersonal philosophy, which is not accepted, which is not enunciated by the Vedas. So this statement is directed at that particular type of philosophy. There, whatever you think is whatever you attain. If you think of Krishna, you get Krishna. If you think of the Supreme Lord, you get the Supreme Lord, but if you don't think of Him, you don't get Him. One attains different kinds of bodies. And to illustrate this particular example, Srila Prabhupada quotes the example of Maharaj Bharat. Maharaj Bharat, his life is actually very interesting. Just to give a background of the teachings of his life, which are explained in this purport, I would like to give a small background of where this story comes from. Lord Rishabdev was an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he instructed his 100 sons in the philosophy of supreme morality. The chief amongst his sons was Maharaj Bharat. And he was the most qualified to be the king of the world. Maharaj Bharat was a perfect king. He ruled for 1 million years on this planet. And that's how this planet came to be known as Bharatavarsha. After his 1 million year reign came to an end, he took the order of the renounced order of life, and he went to Hardwar on the banks of river Gandaki, where he set up his ashram and started his spiritual practices. He had 5 sons, amongst whom he had divided his entire wealth, just like the perfect Vedic order requires one to. And he started performing his tapasya. During the course of his austerities, just by providence, he happened to come across a newborn deer. The deer's mother was on the other side of the river, and she was grazing when she heard the roar of a lion. Deer by nature is a very fearful animal. This female deer, this doe, was panic-stricken. She jumped across the river. She had a miscarriage. This baby fell out. She fell on the other side and died immediately. Now, Maharaj Bharat was a very pious soul. When he saw this whole incident, he thought in his mind, and he was overcome with compassion. He picked up this baby deer and brought him to his ashram and started living with him. Now this baby deer, because it was motherless, it needed a lot of protection, and Maharaj Bharat started acting as its guardian. And in this way, acting as its guardian, he slowly started developing attachment. And in this attachment, he slowly started neglecting his spiritual practices. So, and when he neglected his spiritual practices, gradually the attachment to the deer started growing further and further. Maharaj Bharat had left his beautiful wife and sons and the kingdom of this world. But he became attached to an insignificant deer. And in this way, he completely neglected his spiritual duties. And when he neglected his spiritual duties, he passed away in the mode of ignorance. And because the deer was by his side when he was leaving his body and his consciousness was absorbed in the thoughts of the deer, he attained the body of a deer. So Srila Prabhupada explains here in Srimad Bhagavatam, this is a very exalted thing, It was not that, it was just a matter of providence, it was just a coincidence that the deer happened to come across Maharaj Bharat. Maharaj Bharat's mistake was that he became overly compassionate. There's a very important lesson here. When we practice spiritual life, our thoughts, our consciousness start changing. And we start, as we say, our heart starts melting. But unless we are in the proper guidance of a spiritual master or spiritual authorities, we can get misguided even in this state. So for example, if we see in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was also overcome with compassion. Arjuna's compassion also came from the fact that he was a highly advanced soul. So compassion is a very high principle. Compassion is a quality of very advanced souls. But even in such an advanced state of consciousness, one needs spiritual guidance, because one doesn't know where to apply compassion and where not to. So in this particular case, Maharaj Bharat misapplied his compassion and he took care of this deer and he became attached to it. And in such a way he neglected his spiritual duties, just as Arjuna was willing to do. In that case, there was Krishna to correct him. In this case, Maharaj Bharat was alone and he had to take the body of a deer. So when a devotee neglects his spiritual practices, he is punished. The Supreme Lord punishes. This is not the same as what the karmis undergo. Karmis, the living entities, the ordinary living entities, the ordinary men are punished by the laws of nature. The devotee is punished by the Lord. So this kind of a token punishment that a devotee gets is meant to correct him in his spiritual path. So Maharaj Bharat, even though he took the body of a deer, and we know from our study of the scriptures that animal bodies are miserable. Maharaj Bharat lived like a deer, but his consciousness still remained. He remembered his past life and he left. So he took the birth of a deer in another place. He left that place and he came back to where his ashram was previously in his previous birth, and he lived in the company of the sages, listening to the glories of the Lord and remembering the glories of the Supreme Lord in his heart. In this way he quit his body, and just like Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that a fallen yogi takes birth in high families. Bharat Maharaj, in the body of a deer, took birth in the family of Brahmanas. In this birth of a Brahmana, he remembered his past life. But this time, see, this is the way how Lord punishes. He remembered his lesson and he desired to avoid all kinds of company. good or bad. So therefore he took the form of a jada. Jada in Sanskrit means still, like a stone. So he lived like a blind, deaf, mute man, completely unconscious of his external surroundings. His father, who was a pious Brahmana, tried to teach him the Vedic principles, but he would do whatever was taught, and he would do whatever was contrary to what he was taught. His father would teach him to wash his hands after passing the stool. He would wash his hands before passing the stool. And he was taught to study the scriptures. He would pretend not to learn anything at all. And in this way, he pretended to be a complete fool, just so that even his father would leave him alone. And he retained his consciousness within himself. In this way, when the time passed, he left his home and he started wandering around this world. The story goes on a little bit how he was caught by the dacoits, but because he was completely a liberated soul within, he was caught by the dacoits who wanted to sacrifice him to Durga. But Durga came herself out of the deity and killed the demons and protected him. In this way, while wandering through the planet, once he came across a small entourage that was carrying King Rahogana. Now, as chance would have it, one of the palanquin carriers of Maharaj Rahogana was not available. So the other carriers saw that there was this stout man who was just walking around. So they caught him and employed him in their service, not knowing who he really was, because he would wander around like a madman. But because of him being a liberated soul, as he was walking, carrying this palanquin, he was aware of all the living entities that were crawling on the ground, and he would try to avoid them. This is the principle of non-violence. So because of this, the entourage of King Rahogana was getting disturbed. His journey was getting a little bumpy. So King Rahogana became a little unhappy. And he inquired and he found out who was the culprit. And when he did find out, he chastised Jadabharat for his lack of attention to his service to the great king. And then, when he was chastised thus, Srila Shukadeva Goswami says, Jadabharat was a little disturbed. He wasn't angry, like if somebody chastises us, we are burning with anger. We feel extremely unhappy, we don't like it. So we see this is a very natural phenomenon. Jadabharat was a completely self-realized soul. But even when he was chastised, he felt a little disturbed in his heart. And then he started speaking. Of course, the teachings are like one whole chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, so we'll try to condense it. So, in return, he did not really chastise Maharaj Rahogana, but he made Maharaj Rahogana aware of his existence, of who he really is. Now it is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam that Maharaj Rahogana was also a great soul. So, when Jadabharat started his conversation, when he started discussing with Maharaj Rahogana, Maharaj Rahogana immediately became aware of the exalted state of Jadabharat, and he accepted his teachings. So in these teachings, Jadabharat describes the nature of this material world, what it is, and what is the position of living entities within this material world. Be these living entities, be they kings or ordinary people or the Shudras, Brahmanas, whoever. What is the nature of any living entity who enters the material world? So after these teachings were finished, Maharaj Rahuguna was extremely grateful to Jadbharat. And then Jadbharat then blessed Maharaj Rahuguna and continued his wanderings. Parikshit Maharaj then requested Shukadeva Goswami to once again explain. Parikshit Maharaj says, "My dear Shukadeva Goswami, these teachings that you have described are a little difficult to understand because they are spoken in a lot of allegories. They are told in the form of a story in terms of analogies and similes. They may be a little difficult for a person to understand. So can you please elaborate them in one coherent form?" So Srila Shukadeva Goswami again summarized the teachings of Jadbharat. And this is explained. These teachings are described as the forest of material enjoyment. So, it starts. A living entity in the beginning is compared to a merchant, vanik. Sometimes a merchant goes to a forest to gather some earth and some wood to sell at a higher price in the market. Just like that, a living entity also enters the material world hoping to make some profit within this planet. But just like the merchant, when he enters the forest, out of his greed he goes deeper and deeper and eventually gets lost. Just like that, the living entity also enters the material world, but he is caught by the illusory energy of the Lord. And caught in this position, the living entity does not know his way out. There are different kinds of allurements within this material world and different kinds of entanglements. And the living entity starts sinking deeper and deeper. So in some places in the scriptures it is described that the living entity descends to the state of Brahma, then it starts falling further and further until it just wakes up one day and realizes that he doesn't know where he came from. So this is like the material world. This is like a deep forest. So in the forest there are dacoits and plunderers, people who steal whatever wealth you have. So in case of our lives, the material world, our senses are like those plunderers. The supreme objective of every living entity is to work hard in this material world and serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But our senses are like plunderers who steal our wealth. These senses, they steal our wealth. We want to touch, we want to see, we want to taste. And we end up spending all the wealth that we have earned in satisfying these senses. This is exactly like a thief stealing our money. Living entity in the material world has many kinds of relatives. Wife, children, husband, mother, father, son, daughter. But these are compared to tigers and jackals. A shepherd who goes into the forest wants to protect his flock of sheep. But tigers and jackals, they steal it away. He can't protect them, they steal it away. Just like that, the family members of a materialistic person also steal away his wealth. The wife spends the money, the children spend the money, there is education, there is health, there is so many expenditures. The man wants to protect his wealth, but he is unable to do it. And in this way, the family members take away all his wealth and he becomes unhappy. But even in this unhappiness, he is unable to give up this attachment to this so-called ephemeral happiness. It is just like a farm where the farmer plows every year and takes out the weeds. But without fail, the next time the weeds come back again. These weeds come back because the seeds are still lying there. So the seeds of materialism still lie in the heart of the living entity. The living entity, every time the man suffers, he repents. He says, I won't do this mistake again. But because this seed of sense gratification is still in his heart, he goes back to another body and again starts the materialistic activities. Unless one performs devotional service, these seeds remain as they are. They don't get destroyed. So Srila Prabhupada describes that in the field, if you want to destroy the weeds permanently, you have to burn it. You have to burn the weeds. Then they get removed from the roots. So just like that, the seeds of materialism within our heart can only be burnt when we remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead and chant the holy names of the Lord. So continuing in this way, the living entity goes back, continues in different bodies, suffering the fruits of his labor every lifetime. In this way, the living entity continues through the material forest, and sometimes he gets into a family situation. This is described as a Gandharva Pura. Man has his family, wife, children, grandparents, his relatives, and he thinks that this is enjoyment. But really speaking, this is like a Gandharva Pura, a ghostly building. In the forest, sometimes you see ghosts. These ghosts appear very real, but they really don't have any existence. So just like that, Shukadeva Goswami says that this material happiness, this so-called social structure that we have, also doesn't have any permanent appearance. It is like a temporary happiness. It is like a dream. In this way, the living entity continues through the forest of material enjoyment. And he becomes greedy after material wealth. Gold. So our scriptures describe gold as yellow stool, because the stool of a sick man also looks like the same color as gold. So it is mentioned that in this material world, a materialistic person chases gold wherever he can, profit. But it is just like a man in the forest chasing a will-o-wisp. There is, in the swampy areas, you have this kind of a small glow that is seen sometimes. Whenever the vegetation decays in the forest, you can see some glow. But that glow looks like fire, but it is not really fire. When a man is feeling cold in the forest, he tries to chase this mirage. And sometimes he dies, because this mirage doesn't really have any existence. Just like that in this material world also, people chase material wealth. My investments, my money, my gold. But eventually this doesn't have any reality, because once the body is finished, the gold is not going to go with the body. It stays wherever it is. And in this way, the living entity continues wandering through the forest. And then, sometimes he is caught up. So Srila Shukadeva Goswami is giving the analogy of a man caught in a forest. So sometimes there's a storm in the forest. A whirlwind comes and catches the man. This is just like getting into sex attraction. So in this world we see men find women attractive and women find men attractive. But really speaking, this kind of attachment between man or woman doesn't really make either happy. In a very crude state that we see in the Western world now, marriages and these relationships are formed and they break quickly. And then there is unhappiness. Of course, whenever a relationship breaks, there is bound to be unhappiness. Nobody knows whose fault it is, but there is a breakup and there is a lot of unhappiness. But even in an ideal condition where this relationship does not break, it still brings unhappiness. Why? Because our bodies are temporary. Even if we say we find the best life partner of our life, the life itself has to run its course. And one day we have to leave this body. So whether it's a good relationship or a bad relationship, there's bound to be unhappiness someday. This is the nature of material world. So this in Sanskrit is described by the word pramada. This is madness. This attraction between male and female, to the point that a man completely forgets the religious principles that we see now all over the world. It's not just in the West. If you go to the Oriental countries, even in a place like India, you'll see this attraction between man and woman is so strong that there's a complete disregard for all forms of what you can call propriety, common decency. Forget about dharma, religion. There is no. This is madness. This is pramada, and that's why the Sanskrit word for this kind of attraction is pramada. It's madness, complete madness. So for a man, the woman is described as pramada, one who induces madness. And this is applicable the other way also. If a woman becomes mad after a man, this is also the same thing. In this way, he loses his memory and he chases sense gratification like a mirage. Because he is doing sinful activities, he finishes his pious credits quickly. So he tries to approach these Babajis and Swamis and basically atheistic people to take their blessings. This is like a man in the forest jumping into a dry river. If you jump in a dry river, what happens? You don't get any water, but you break your head. This is how Srila Prabhupada describes it. You chase sense gratification, that's what you end up with. So getting the blessings of these atheistic people eventually leads to that kind of an end. But the living entity who's caught up in the material, who's caught in this forest of material enjoyment, cannot understand these truths. At every step, just like in the forest, you get caught in the thick bushes and trees, he's also caught in the thick webs of Maya, different kinds of attachments that he has developed: home, property, relationships, prestige, position, reputation. All these kind of entanglements hold him tight. This is just like being in a forest, getting caught in these bushes. This is how material world also entangles us. If we may be in any order of life, but if we are caught in these kind of materialistic concepts of greed, pride, lust, reputation, fame, relationships, wealth, position, power, we are exactly like a man caught in a forest. And factually speaking, there is no way out. Because in a forest, there is no one to tell you which way is out. And in this way, he meets across various kinds of disturbing living entities. There are his enemies who are like serpents. There are his relatives, sometimes who harass him. They are described like mosquitoes and gnats and flies, who are constantly, buzzing for his attention. And then he gets chastisement from the government officials. In fact, this Bhagavatam is being spoken 5,000 years back. And Srila Shukadeva Goswami says that government officials are like Rakshasas, man-eaters. And if the living entity is unfortunately he's in their disfavor, he is eaten alive by them. He loses all his material wealth and he becomes completely morose. So like in the forest also, Rakshasas exist in the forest. So in the city areas you have governments. Everywhere across the world. So sometimes if the government is unhappy with you, you lose everything. Srila Shukadeva Goswami, the scriptures say this is not my opinion. So he gets chastisement, which is like the sound of owls and crickets. But because he is so attached to sense gratification, he is now aware of his position. He understands he is in danger. But he really doesn't know what needs to be done, what he has to do. Because sense gratification is the only thing he understands. So he seeks this further and further. And in this way, he sometimes imagines that his father or grandfather has taken birth in his family because the family attachment is so strong. He becomes happy. Sometimes he thinks, the death of our relatives makes us feel so sad. But then we try to imagine, this my child looks like my grandfather. So, my grandfather has come back in the family. And in this way, he tries to concoct some happiness. He's not really happy. He's miserable. But he's just trying to imagine some happiness now. And then in the course of material life, there are many rituals to be performed. In India, if you go, people perform these sanskaras, Namkaran sanskar, Vivaha sanskar. You saw like Thursday there was Vivaha sanskar. You see there's this sanskar, Anteshti sanskar. And these sanskaras are described like mountains, like hills in the forest. They are covered with thorns and stones. but the living entity has to move through those. These sanskaras are not very pleasurable. They are a very difficult thing to perform. There's so much of preparation and so much wealth and so much preparation, so much effort goes. But we still have to do those. This is material life. In fact, there are 7 types of sanskaras that need to be performed for a grahastha. Of course, nobody does it. But if you see, even those who don't follow any sanskaras have to do so many activities. If you are married, if you see Matajis have to take care of children, men have to pay their taxes, file their income tax returns, and do so many activities. These are not pleasant at all, right? I mean, if you come to, are you coming from India?
No, Nepal.
Nepal. So you have to file that immigration form, and the government official asks you, why do you want to come here? What are you going to do? All this is painful. No one really enjoys it. But still, these are the kind of sanskaras we have to perform. These are exactly like climbing thorny hills in the forest, which the living entity climbs. But at the end of it, we don't really obtain anything. It's just a little bit of happiness that we get out of these things. In this way, the living soul keeps wandering. Sometimes he loses his temper, he speaks harshly to his loved ones, and then he suffers even more. And in this way, sometimes becoming too despondent with material life, he lies down on the ground and falls asleep. And sleep is described like a python. Sometimes when a man sleeps in the forest, a serpent can come and eat him up. So like this, the sleep also eats up a man. But why is sleep such a dangerous thing? Because a materialist who works too hard needs to rest a lot. And when he is resting, he is wasting the valuable time in which he could have remembered the Lord and saved his life. So sleep is exactly like a python swallowing a man. And in this way, the materialistic man wastes his life in working very hard during the daytime and sleeping very hard during the night time. And in this way, he continues his wanderings. And he gets caught with this whole concept of sex life. He's caught in this web, and then he concocts his whole relationships and everything. And of course, he doesn't derive much pleasure. So he approaches these fake gurus and swamis who are compared to monkeys. Their only purpose in life is to enhance materialism. And material life essentially means sex life. And they try to bless their disciples in that way. But Shukadeva Goswami describes that they are like monkeys. They really have no knowledge. But when he's getting caught in this kind of a mirage, this living entity, when he's like performing his mischievous monkey activities, he becomes fearful of the elephant of death. So, Srila Prabhupada writes that the time Lord Krishna's wheel, the chakra, is actually the representative of the wheel of time which cuts everyone. So when the living entity becomes afraid of death, he tries to approach these gurus and swamis to seek some kind of solace. But it is described that these swamis and these gurus who are not Vaishnavas, they are like herons and vultures, small birds, whereas death is like the lion. So when the lion attacks, small birds cannot save a man. So likewise, those who are not the devotees of the Lord cannot save you if you approach these kind of atheistic gurus. So in this way, performing mischievous activities, the living entity becomes afraid of the elephant of death, and then he falls into a cave. This cave is nothing but the fear of old age. An old man is very afraid of death. If you go to the hospitals, if you see old men or those who are dying of terminal diseases, you'll see that they are very afraid of death. No one really knows what death is like. At least anyone who's living doesn't really know what death means. And yet, instinctively, because of our past sanskaras, we know that death is something really fearful. And we are not afraid of sleeping in the bed. We just go, close our eyes and fall asleep. So technically, death also looks like sin. We just close our eyes. But people are very afraid of death. And this is all because of our past sanskaras. We know how dangerous death is. And people who are old or people who are sick, they become very afraid of death. So in this way, the living entity who is excessively enjoying material life also becomes afraid of death. And this death is described like a cave in the mountain, where the elephant of death is chasing. So in a cave, there is really no way out. It's not a tunnel, it's a cave. So when you fall in a mountain cave, there is no way out. Once you fall into the fear of death, there is only death which is next. So in this way, the living entity dies in a very fearful condition. Sometimes, in this kind of a fearful situation, while he's approaching different kinds of gurus and swamis, the living entity comes across genuine sadhus, those who are self-realized souls. Self-realized souls are peaceful in their minds, not living in sense gratification. These kind of souls are very sober, and they are very much in the path of self-realization. And these souls, these sadhus, are always working for the benefit of all the other living entities. So these sadhus try to give genuine instructions to this kind of a living entity. But because of being caught excessively in sense gratification, this unfortunate man is not able to take their association, and he goes back to these monkey kind of gurus whose real business is just sense gratification. And in this way, the living entity is completely lost in the forest of material existence and dies a miserable death. And after dying like that, takes another body to continue this cycle of misery. This was the description of the misery suffered in the material world by a living entity. But like all Vaishnavas, Vaishnavacharyas, Maharaj Bharat, or Jada Bharat in this case, was not going to just scare Maharaj Raghugana. He just wanted to shake him up and give him a dose of reality, as they say. So he gives his teachings at the end. He says, however, if one takes the shelter of Lord Hari, one can be delivered from this dangerous position. One can overcome this fear of death. One can overcome the fearful jungle of material life. So like it is mentioned in the... So in this way Shukadeva Goswami concludes that after concluding his teachings, Maharaj Raghugana felt himself very fortunate that he had come across Jada Bharat. He thanked him profusely, and Jada Bharat continued his wanderings across the world. Because after this body, he attained the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He attained the nature of Krishna directly. So if we see, in the scriptures, in Prema Vivart, it is written, what happened in the life of Maharaj Bharat was Krishnera Bahirmukhaya Bhoga Vancha Kare Nikate Stha Maya Tara Japatiya Dhare. Whenever a living entity, even an advanced devotee of the Lord, whenever a living entity turns his face away from the Supreme Lord, Krishna, he is immediately caught by Maya. Krishnera Bahirmukh, whenever he turns his face away from Krishna, Krishnera Bahirmukhaya Bhoga Vancha Kare, whenever the living entity turns his face away from Krishna to enjoy the senses, Nikate Stha Maya Tanra Japatiya Dhari. Maya is just standing next door. She is just standing next to him. Maya Nikate Stha Maya Tanra Japatiya Dhari. She jumps on him and captures him. Whether you're a Vaishnava, or you're a Christian, or you're a Jew, or you're a Muslim, every religion gives you a process for purification. So Christians have the rosary beads to chant the holy names. The Muslims have this tasbih. The Jews also chant the holy name. So the scriptures say that in the age of Kali, Harer Naam eva kevalam, Kalau nasti eva gatir anyatha. That is, in the age of Kali, there is no other means of deliverance. It is also a blessing, because in the age of Satyug, you have to do thousands of years of tapasya. And after doing that tapasya, if you made one slight mistake in your austerities, you had to start all over again. You had thousands of years of austerities to perform. In the age of Treta, it was the yajnas, The age of Dwapar was about worshipping in the temples, opulent worship in the temples. But in Kali Yuga, the conscience of men, the consciousness of men, and the ingredients of this world are all impure. There is really no way anyone can perform any austerities. So in fact, even sannyas is forbidden. Where is the question of performing austerities? So therefore, chanting of the holy names of the Lord is the only means of deliverance. In every story of the scriptures that we see, especially Srimad Bhagavatam, the conclusion is always the same. Chanting of the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, chanting His holy names, is the only means of deliverance. Srimad Bhagavatam describes many stories through many allegories and many kinds of similes. But the conclusion is always the same. Chant the glories of the Lord, chant the holy names of the Lord continuously. And this is the only means of deliverance. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
You mentioned that this family life is very miserable, but why do devotees get married then? And is there a difference between devotees family life and materialist family life?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I think this is the most logical question also. And I'm giving this lecture when I have entered the family life just 3 days back myself. See, please understand, the body, the living entity has taken a body and a mind. And this body and mind has a certain character. You know, like if you know, the temple has few vehicles. Some vehicles have diesel engines, some have petrol engines. So even though they are used in devotional service, the diesel vehicle requires diesel only. You can't fill petrol and say Hari Bol. Simply the holy name won't help there. It has to fulfill its certain characteristic. So likewise, the human body, the human mind, the human consciousness also has certain needs. Therefore, sometimes, to fulfill those needs, we have to perform certain functions. Even though we are Vaishnavas, we still have to eat. We still need to sleep, and we still need to breathe air. Likewise, our consciousness also demands some relationships. It's not just about marriage or a kind of family relationship. Even the relationships amongst ourselves. It's the need of human, it's an emotional need. But there's a difference. If the Shastras don't forbid these activities, the Shastras don't forbid relationships, not even the relationships between men and women, but Shastras put injunctions. There's a way of doing it. There's a way of having a relationship. And if you follow that way, you follow the way of Dharma. And if you follow according to the Dharma, this relationship also leads you eventually to liberation. The relationships that were described in this forest of material existence are materialistic relationships. Relationships which are meant for one's own sense gratification. Selfish relationships meant for one's own satisfaction. But in the Vaishnava community, when we take relationships, when we form bonds with others, it's for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. We're just coming together to fulfill our emotional needs in such a way that we cooperate with each other and we serve the Lord. The economic theory states that if a man has family life, then the impetus for economic growth is stronger. This is a modern economic theory. So this kind of impetus in our lives translates into impetus for service of the Lord. So when we have healthy relationships with each other, and this is not just the relationship between husband and wife, this is also the relationship between brahmacharis, relationships between brotherly relationships between all the Vaishnava devotees. When we have healthy relationships with each other, we become enthusiastic, we feel happy, we are emotionally fulfilled. And when we are emotionally fulfilled, our services become much better. So if the modern Keynesian theory, is it Keynesian theory, talks about family life, if the theory talks about economic growth, we're talking about spiritual growth here. When we have a healthy relationship, we have a happy heart. And when we have a happy heart, our service is more fruitful. We're serving the Lord also feels pleased by our service. So relationships in Vaishnava culture are very, very important. In fact, if you see, Vaishnava culture is based on relationships. It is impersonalism to think that relationships are not needed at all. In fact, in our own Sampradaya, if you see, Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya is very unique. Srila Prabhupada, if you see, formed not just one, he formed an international family. In other Sampradayas, if you see especially impersonalism, it doesn't matter whether the Guru is alive or dead, it doesn't matter. Because Guru is one, I am one, you are one, everyone is one. But in our Sampradaya, everyone has a unique position, a unique place. We all fulfill unique purposes in life. Even amongst yourself, if you see the Vaishnava community here, every one of you is special and performing one special function. And when you appreciate each other and when you have good relationships with each other, you become more enthusiastic. Why do you come to the temple? For these deities? For this hall? For this building? What is it that makes this place a temple? It is the relationships between the Vaishnavas. See, there are so many buildings in the neighborhood also. In fact, there is one bar and nightclub, which is a more impressive looking building. But do any of us wish to go there? It's also a very nice looking building. But here we have a relationship. See, for example, this Prabhuji has come from Nepal. So many Prabhujis have come from India, Mauritius, Finland. All over the world they are coming here. Why? We don't know each other. But when we come here, we feel a certain level of bonding. We feel some sort of a relationship. And that's why we have this small community. So Vaishnava relationships are not meant for our own enjoyment. These are meant for the service of the Lord. But when we do service of the Lord, we also feel satisfied. Savaya pumsham paro dharmo yato bhakti radokshate apratihata ahituki yayatma suprasidati. When we serve the Lord, we also feel satisfied. So if a relationship is formed for the purpose of service of the Lord, that relationship brings more happiness. Just like Abhay Prabhu said last time, when a husband and wife make Krishna the center of their life, they have a much happier married life as compared to a husband and wife who want to enjoy each other. Does that answer the question?
Serving each other is the key.
Service, yeah, serving the Lord and serving the Vaishnavas, the devotees. Any other questions? Yes, Prabhu?
Thank you, Prabhu, for your nice explanation. So I was just thinking, in the verse and in the purport, it was mentioned about thinking about Krishna at the moment of death.
Yes.
So actually this morning we were just discussing this in the Bhagavatam class, how like in the moment of death one is taking shelter in the Lord.
Yeah.
So that means that there should be like a very deep relationship with the Lord.
Yes.
So how does one develop that kind of a deep relationship with the Lord on the platform of the soul, like that even at the critical moment he can take shelter?
Of the Lord?
Yes.
Okay. We can have a very long philosophical answer. Sorry. You see, our human mind is such that it forms impressions. Whatever activity we do, we start getting habituated to it. Whatever we do, for instance, like now devotees here speak Finnish. To me, my natural tongue language is Hindi. And I really don't remember when I studied the grammar or when I studied the conjunctions and the proper structure of Hindi. But now if you ask me, I know exactly what I am speaking. And anybody who reads my language will also say that I understand the language perfectly. Just like you can do for the Finnish language. So because you have been doing it continuously, if you are continuously remembering the Lord throughout your life, you will remember Him at the end of the life also. See, remember, they say, a drowning man clutches at the straws. A dying man is exactly like a drowning man. It's a fearful experience. As described in Ayurveda, first you get tingling sensation here, and then you start losing all kinds of sensation from the ends of the limbs. And gradually the skin starts losing sensation, and the living entity immediately knows that his soul is now separating from the body. And that's a very fearful condition. In fact, if anyone is here from medical profession, they'll see that they can tell us how dying patients behave. Sometimes they become very fearful. They may or may not be in pain, but they are certainly very fearful. Because death is a fearful experience. At that time, you just want to take shelter of anyone who's close to you. Sometimes men cry, oh, mama, mama, mama. They take shelter of their mother, their father, anybody. But if you practice remembering the Lord throughout your life, then you'll remember the Supreme Lord at the end of the life. But this process is not as easy, though it may be a very simple process. It's not an easy one. You have to chant the holy names. You have to read the scriptures. See, simply chanting of the holy names is sufficient. But for souls like us who are conditioned, our mind is full of lots of other things. Our minds are full of garbage. So we have to read the scriptures to understand who that Supreme Lord is. Just like a boy and girl when they're about to get married, they try to find out, who is the boy, what does he do, where does he live, who is his family. So likewise, or if we apply for a job, we try to find out what is the company, what does it do, what do they pay. So likewise, we read the scriptures to understand the Supreme Lord. So there is the Bible, there is the Quran, there is Torah, there is the Gita, the Vedic scriptures, describing the Supreme Lord. We have to read these to understand who that Lord is. Once we have understood that, we chant the holy names to develop that relationship. See, Harer Naam Eva Kevalam Kalau Gatir Nasti Eva Anyatha. That in the age of Kali, chanting of the holy names is a meditation process. If you want to call me, you dial my number. You dial my number and you wait for the phone to ring. Immediately on dialing the number, you won't see me. First the connection has to be made. So likewise, we chant the holy names. But this chanting of the holy names of the Lord is not an ordinary process of recitation. It's not like saying Coca-Cola or Pepsi or anything. These are holy names. When you chant these, the consciousness within the heart starts reviving. So it is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita again that when the devotee remembers me, when the devotee is purified by performing karma yoga, from within the heart, this knowledge is self-illuminated. The Lord within the heart, Paramatma within the heart, gives that consciousness by which the living entity starts connecting to the Supreme Lord. So even though we right now may be in a grossly materialistic condition, even by a little practice of spiritual life, we start understanding how connection exists between the nature and the Supreme Lord. This is the beginning of understanding of the Supreme Nature. If you chant very deeply and more, this realization of the Supreme Lord starts coming in. That's the beginning of formation of your relationship with the Lord. We're not talking about the bhav and prema stages here. We're just talking about the plain sadhana stage. Even in the beginning, when you start chanting the holy names of the Lord, you can start seeing some change in your own consciousness. When we were preaching to students in the college, I still distinctly remember that some of the students who started chanting couldn't take it any further and they left it. But even then, those who had become vegetarians could not go back to eating meat. They found it so difficult to eat non-vegetarian food. They found it so difficult. So see, this chanting had some minor effect on their hearts, even when they had just started, without even knowing what they were doing. that Namabha stage, they were still experiencing some advancement in their own lives. So if you chant the holy names faithfully, you will develop that relationship with the Supreme Lord. And the more you chant, the more meaningful and deeper this relationship will become. But this faith in the chanting will come when you first start reading the scriptures. Srila Prabhupada's books are the easiest translations of scriptures anywhere in the world. If you read them very carefully, your faith in chanting of the holy names will become stronger and stronger. In fact, in the beginning stages, there was a boy who I remember. He could not chant. He found the chanting process very boring and he couldn't take it. He used to fall asleep. Somehow or the other, he just kept on reading the books. He had this hobby of reading, so he liked reading. He took a Gita and he kept on reading. And 1 year later, he again started chanting. Of course, he's a brahmachari in the temple now. It took him 3-4 years, but eventually he joined the temple. He's now in book distribution and preaching and so many other activities. So you see, reading of the scriptures gives us faith in chanting of the holy names. And by chanting the holy names, we understand the scriptures better. And by doing these two activities simultaneously, we develop a very meaningful relationship with the Lord. Does that answer your question, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I have two questions, Prabhu, about the relation and marriage.
Yes.
So, marriage is very important. The promise in our Vedic religion.
Yes.
So, its Vedic religions in the marriage chant is that the Jodidam Hridayam Mamo Todostu Hridayam Tavo. Jodidam Hridayam Tavo Todostu Hridayam Mamo. It means that my heart, let your mind be my mind, let my mind be your mind. So it means that it is the great promise. So what is the marriage? Before getting to marriage, everybody should what's the actual the marriage. It's not for the enjoyment. It's not for the getting each other. It's first of all the how can I say the mantra is mentioned that it is the great promise. Then start the promise with others, God and the Supreme Lord. It is that way. So if not get married, the people. So who will in the next time who will chant the holy name or the
You mean marriage sanskar?
Yeah, marriage.
You mean that devotional life is possible only after marriage sanskar? Or like what do you mean exactly?
Actually, it's not the any kind of barricade or any kind of how can I say the protection before marriage or after marriage. Because how can I say the chant holy name or the related with the lords, it can be how can I say it's no limit of time. It's no limit of after marriage or before marriage. But why it's telling like that the sum is that way that the marriage or the family life is one kind of the
Sacrifice.
No, not barricade of like that the spiritual life.
Barricade?
A barricade.
Oh, you mean to say that?
Because I means that the four ashram is brahmacharya, vanapastha, grihastha, sannyasa. So who is the many of the this stage? Grihastha. Grihastha is many.
Right.
So if grihastha cannot be related with the holy name and the how can I say the spiritual activities, so it cannot be passed. It cannot be going on. So I think is the marriage or the grihastha is cannot be the how can I say that it's a matter of thinking. It cannot be like that. We are thinking that okay, we get married and then we make family, more child and the more. Not is that way. We can think is that way. Then we need to get married to how can I say that chant more holy name.
Yes,
God.
yes.
That's it.
See.
What was the question?
Okay, I'll just try to explain. You just tell me if it's right or wrong. It says that marriage is not exactly a barrier to spiritual life, but it is also like a yajna of coming together to remember the holy names. The purpose of marriage is not to just enjoy senses, but actually to perform religious activities together, to chant the holy names in togetherness. Is this right?
Yes. This is the, how can I say, great example is the Nityananda Mahaprabhu.
Nityananda Mahaprabhu.
Nityananda Mahaprabhu 2 times he got
Yeah,
married.
in fact, after taking sannyas.
Yes. And another question is that we cannot be materialistic.
Yes,
We cannot be greedy for material.
absolutely.
But without material, how we can
Progress.
lead our life? It's not only mean that personal life, the whole universe life. I am asking you this type of question, the economical of the life, of the world. So we cannot be materialistic, we cannot be greedy for material.
Mhm.
But without material, the
This one
ISKCON cannot, how can I say that? Proceed on their activities.
So what he says is that
Yeah.
without having an economic activity, husband, wife, and then jobs and making money, we won't probably have ISKCON also, right?
The material, because the material cannot be, how can I say, enemy for us, or material cannot be, how can I say that? It's of course it's using like that. How
Yeah.
we use. If knife we can cut an apple and we can kill and people. So
Yes.
material is I think that materials can be that way.
Yes, you're right actually.
Yeah.
See, material life is not really our enemy. Please understand, the form of a woman is not a problem for a man. It's the desire to enjoy that form of woman which is a problem. Have you ever taken an aspirin, that headache tablet? The medicine in that tablet is only 1 microgram. If you take 1 gram of that medicine, actually, it is simply going to put you in coma. It's that dangerous. Just like the analogy of knife given by Srila Prabhupada, that a knife in the hands of a surgeon can save a life, and the same knife in the hands of a murderer can kill a man. Likewise, these yajnas of this life are also like this. Married life, also, if it is for sense gratification, it is this forest that we have described in the Bhagavatam. But the same married life, if it is for the purpose of maintenance of some economic activity with the chief purpose of propagating the holy names, then this married life is actually a blessing. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur married and he had 11 children. Now, by today's estimation, you may think whatever you feel like, but Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was a son of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. So you can imagine what kind of a grahastha life he had. Srila Prabhupada also had 5 children. He also had some family life. But the lesson here is that in both the examples you will see a contrast. In case of Srila Prabhupada, in case of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, when his family was entirely Vaishnava and his son himself was an Acharya, Bhakti Vinod Thakur continued in family life, and only at the end he took Babaji Diksha. Because the family life was conducive to his activities of preaching the holy names of the Lord. But in case of Srila Prabhupada, his family life was not conducive. And that's also another lesson to us. When his life was not conducive, he took sannyas. And then he started his preaching activities. So both the acharyas have given us lessons. Remember that old English poem, Lives of Great Men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. So acharyas' lives are not some ordinary lives. These great personalities are not just living like some ordinary men. Every activity of their life is a lesson to us. So in case of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, we see what a conducive family life is. And in case of Srila Prabhupada, we see what an inconducive family life is. And again, the acharyas have given us a lesson on how to live in every condition and continue strongly with our devotional service. This is not to say that tomorrow one should divorce his wife and leave and get back into that kind of a position. No. Srila Prabhupada took sannyas. After leaving his home, he left everything. He did not touch a single penny from his household. He lived homeless. He suffered a lot. He would go without food, he would go homeless, pushing the mission of his Guru Maharaj. Unless we are ready for that position, we should not be living home life directly, just to avoid the difficulties of home life. Because please understand, you may escape your wife, you may escape your house, but you can't escape material miseries. You may leave one position and get into another equally miserable position. And not only that, you would have broken dharma also. So, please understand, for us who come to devotional life, our lives are aligned with Krishna now. Every activity we do, whether it's cooking or singing or driving or maintaining a building, the purpose is Krishna. And that's the only way we are saved from entanglement. We see the story of Maharaj Bharat. He was a very advanced devotee. He neglected the religious principles. And not only that, he didn't do anything for his own gratification. Just out of compassion, he neglected principles. And he had to suffer like this. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'm sorry, this is a very long story actually, so I have to cut it short very much. I might have missed out on some details, but if you have any questions, please, you're most welcome to ask. Or if you have any comments or corrections. Yes, Mataji's, Prabhuji's. Srila Prabhupada ki